Good afternoon, everyone. Hello. Welcome to today's webinar. We're live August 24th. For those who don't already know, the word CAFIDA means learning in Creek. And in that retrospect, today we'll be learning about grant writing when you're not a grant writer, presented by Marie Bonneville. Let me introduce myself. I am not NAHASDA Atkins. I am Lewis Porter Jr. I'm the marketing coordinator here at the Native Learning Center, and we are very excited to have you attend today. Please follow along as I read this disclaimer out loud. This webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. How to interact during the presentation. To use the hand tool at the top of the screen to select if you'd like to raise your hand, agree, disagree, applaud. Now you see this very similar looking screen that you're looking at. At the bottom left, it's a presentation that's available for download currently. The middle section is today's survey, where we have all the information for our survey we'll be pushing out later on today. And of course, on your right-hand side is the chat information where you can see everyone leaving things in the chat. Do us a huge favor. Tell us where you're from in the chat so everybody will know where everybody's from and we can interact. Sorry about that. Let me just go back one. It's my great pleasure to introduce Marie Bonneville, who will be handling this session of the webinar. Marie, let me hand it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the warm introduction to the Native Learning Center. Thank you for having me. And wow, with everyone in the room, I really do appreciate you letting me know where you're all from. I'm currently located here in Atlanta, Georgia, well, a little north of Atlanta, Georgia, but originally from South Florida, and spent most of my time working with the Seminole Tribe of Florida there. So I'm excited to be with you guys today. We've got so much to talk about that let's just get started. I'm going to share my screen real quick, and we'll pick back up where we left off. So hopefully everybody is able to see my screen, and I can see the chat area, but Lewis will be monitoring it as well. And if for some reason there's a question and I don't see it or address it at the time, Lewis can always stop and let me know. But definitely we want you interacting in the chat area. It's a great opportunity to network and learn more about each other. You know, I think with what we do in housing, sometimes it can feel a little lonely, a little silo. So it's good to know that there are people like you with the same titles doing the same good work. So if I can get my screen to move, let's see here. Awesome. So today's conversation is grant writing when you're not a grant writer, right? As housing professionals, which although the Native Learning Center works in the Native housing space, I know that I have folks in the room that are small business owners, entrepreneurs, nonprofit, working with groups that are nonprofit. So I've got a mixed bag here, but typically in housing specific, you're wearing all these different hats, especially after COVID, with all the funding that was flooded in, that you might be in the throes of reporting right now. So you are a writer in that regard, right? You're writing to detail all the good works that you've been doing, but tribal organizations and program managers have to figure out how to switch gears and how to bring staff onto the same page, right, in the same book, so that way, whether it's public funding or private funding, you know, your capacity is demonstrated, right? So in this webinar, we'll talk about the essential grant writing techniques that are needed. And so part of it is that grant writing is an art, and it is also a science. It's important that we understand the two elements as to what the grantors are looking for, right? What are the funders looking for? And then what do we as the grant writers need to, or the grantees, right? The people receiving the funds, what do we need to know? There's mechanics, like anything. We want to talk about, what does your tone look like? What information is essential to the grantor? Like, what do they need to hear from you in order to be acknowledged? And then also the organizational dynamics. I think we, like most of tribal organizations, are not, immune from politics. We're not immune from pressures from different departments and programs. So it's important to kind of talk about how do you build relationships with your funders? What happens when an executive leaves and they're the one that had the relationship, right? We'll talk about, what can we do to build capacity within our organization with the other program managers that are going to be maybe operating the grant itself. And then also managing the grant. That is probably, if you currently have grants, that is your biggest benefit to this process, is that you're already managing these grants. Managing them well means that you'll be able to demonstrate capacity to manage new grants. So again, welcome everyone. So how many of my attendees have written grants here in this room? You can go ahead and put it in the chat area and I'll check that out later. It'll help me tailor kind of what I need to talk about or emphasize. But outside of that, what stresses you out the most about applying for a grant? So I'm assuming if you saw the title, you thought to yourself, I've never, maybe I'm thinking about writing a grant, or I'm being asked to write a grant and I don't know where to go from here. And so, cool. And if you don't mind putting what types of grants you have in the chat, that'd be great as well. Because we're going to get to the question of where do I find grants? And so, that's another treasure trove for me, is that I get to say, okay, well, what other grants are out there that I haven't maybe come across? So that work in tribal housing and seem to be doing well for you and your organization. So grant writers, entrepreneurs, program officers, someone who is willing to sacrifice sleep, sanity, and savings to fund an idea or program. Working closely with executive leadership, you can kind of tell the ones that are crazy excited about a new grant opportunity, putting all the energy and effort into trying to make this thing happen, right? So that's just how they're wired. Another definition, and I didn't write these, they came from NAHASDA.org, but a dreamer, a problem solver, doer, risk taker, decision maker, coffee maker, editor, and multitasker. And I think we all have elements of that as well, right? These are the kind of soft skills that no one talks about. But you have to have these things in order to be successful when you're writing a grant. So, what are the frequently asked questions when it comes to grants? Well, what is the grant itself, right? It's not a loan. It's not a gift or charity, which the perception is out there that that's what it is, and it's not. It's the giving of resources for a specific purpose. And the more we hone in on that, the better off we'll be as we start to write this thing out, right? So it's a mutual exchange. And if it's a mutual exchange, then we have to understand what role the grantor plays in this. The grantor is a definition of who is providing the grant, and the grantee is the recipient, the one who is receiving the grant. And when I say one, it could be an organization, it could be a business, it could be a nonprofit. The art of storytelling is nothing new, especially in Native communities. So in that way, we've got a leg up, right? Telling the story connects a face, the grantee, with the name, the grantor. And of course, people will always kind of forget what you said. I mean, I talk a lot. You're probably a lot of these words will go away. But but what I did, sure, there's a PowerPoint, you can reference it later. But how I made you feel, hopefully after at the end of this webinar, confident to move forward with your grant writing, that's what you're going to remember, right? And I think when you're doing your writing for these grants, you have to kind of come with that mindset to the table. There's also the science element to this, right? First, like any good science project, there's research. Where are the funders? Who are the funders? What are the goals and objectives? If it's a small business or any size business, really, what are the needs that you have? And then where's the data, right? We know that in tribal communities, the data isn't there. Just using the statistics that we get through the census and other government driven data isn't going to do it. We've got to create our own needs assessments and make sure that we're putting those out there in order to justify the need that we all know and feel every day. It's not so much justifying it, it's making sure that we can quantify it and make sure that it's out there for our funders to see the need and demonstrate that need. So how does the funders' objectives align with our service in the case of a TDHE or business? And I'm just reading through some of the experiences here, which is great because assisting with grants is a great kind of like window into grant writing because, oftentimes, and that's how I started. So to kind of give you some background, I started with the Seminole Tribe of Florida in 2007 as their education program manager. Mainly in vocational and work experience training. And then eventually I came over to the Native Learning Center and learned all there is to know about housing. So that was cool. But I will say that when you're assisting in just a small part of maybe program services, making sure that you're reporting on your programs, everything there is to know. And the grant writers themselves, they're going to lean on your information. What you provide them is what they're putting in the grant itself. So there's a real important relationship there that, we'll talk more about that, but it's really the window into starting that process of writing the grant yourself. So who makes the grants? Of course, you've got the federal government, state, tribal, local governments, private organizations. We saw a flood of private organizations making grants here after the pandemic, which meant that it's a pretty chaotic time, and it still is because now we're on the throes of reporting all of this funding. As far as what we did with the funds, what impact we had with those funds. So who receives the grants? Of course, you all, local governments, the university systems have huge grants. I mean, they're the kind of like the grandfathers of the grant making system, as far as like the history of grants go. Community organizations, businesses, of course, and individuals, as I said. Grant myths is that it's free and easy money, because it's not. And it's that it can only be used, in that way of starting and saving for a business, that's only available for large specialized nonprofits, and that finding the grant is the hardest part. As you'll see here, there are tons of scams because it's not free, it's not easy, it's not the kind of thing that is done haphazard. There has to be a lot of work and energy and effort put into making sure that the information is accurate, and there's an evaluation process as well. So with that, I say that it's not to scare anyone, but what you're reporting should be that measurable impact, and it's not something that you can fluff. So in this presentation, I like to do what's called Start Today tools, and that's getting familiar with all the different tribal housing grants that are out there, because I'm talking to an audience specific to mostly housing. I know that there are others, but in our case, typically what we do is we take Indian Housing Block Grant funds, that is not competitive, with something like ICDBG, which is competitive, Indian Community Development Block Grant funds. And then we leverage those resources to maybe get additional funds to complete projects. So that's kind of just my take, but what are some other grants that are out there? And I know I see here Lisa's with the Terra Vocational Training Center. Let's see. ASN is in the house, BIA, Highway Safety, local grants. Michael Reyes has had some experience there. We even have somebody who's rated some grants in the room as well. So the good thing is with grant writing and with also that reporting, sharing the information with other communities is also, or other organizations that are like-minded, is good as well, for the purpose of demonstrating relationship. So these individuals are the ones you can lean on when it's time to do your statement of impact, or they can write something on your behalf when you're needing that sort of support letters, etc. So it's great to know that there are organizations that you all work with that may have a sister organization that could benefit from discussing grants more outside of this webinar. So, in a perfect world, if you had, unlimited resources, then grant writing would be an easy thing, but it's not. You've got people under pressure, processes under pressure, and technology under pressure. So let's start with people. If you're a program manager and you've never written a grant and you've got that pressure to write a grant, maybe you've run out of funding, right? Construction costs being what they are, timelines, we've had the craziest weather in the last couple of years that have delayed construction. So, you might have a situation where you're under pressure to find that that funding so that you can complete projects. You might have staff turnover. That's another way that people are under pressure. Processes are under pressure. If you work for a tribal department, as I did with the Seminole Tribe, then that they have grant writers on staff, and where they're fortunate enough to do that, that means that they have a process. I can see a grant is available, and if I don't have enough time, if I don't give them enough leeway to include that in their workflow, we may not be able to apply for the grant itself, right? So the process that you all have to go under is also important to know, right? And if you're new to grant writing, then I think you need to make yourself familiar with that process as soon as possible, because it is going to add to the pressure. And then lastly, technology is under pressure. For those of you who have written grants, you know that your computer stops working the moment you go to submit. And it's not just that. It's not just the computer that you're submitting on. It's the portal that you're submitting through, right? So there's that as well. So knowing that, what can we do to mitigate it? So to start with, we have to talk about collaboration and partnership. This is why I had you all put what grant writing familiarity you have, to say where you're from, and then also to talk about the grants that you have, because maybe there's someone else that it makes sense to partner with. Even if it's just in showing what that grant application looks like for you, the process itself. But once you're finding like-minded organizations and you're working with them, or departments and you're working with them within the tribal community, then collaboration strengthens your grant application. So that's number one, as a takeaway, is that, of course, if you can demonstrate that you can collaborate with other individuals or other organizations, that makes sense to the grantors. Funders like to see that there's a joint mission to meet, and that you've been able to do that in the past with other agencies, in the case of if you're working with federal funds or private partners. Having support from your strategic partners also, again, going back to the letters of support, is also very, very important. And I don't want to miss out on the chat. I feel like it's very active in here. So let me just... Oh, awesome. And then we've got some newbies to the grant writing process as well. So welcome. So what I was saying was the letters of support is just basically you getting, showing that your demonstrated capacity has been utilized before by other agencies. If you're working with federal funding or with partners, local partners, it could be small nonprofits that support the homeless, that you all also provide them with additional resources or support. So just looking at it from that perspective, your measurable need for the grant must not just show outcome. And this kind of goes back to performance measures and saying that it's not just about outcome, but also impact. And you're not always going to hit every objective, right? Maybe you put 5 points in your grant and then you only hit 3. Well, what does that look like? What have you learned from that? Demonstrating that in your reporting matters, because if they can't see that there's been some, then they can't see that you're correcting. You're able to correct on your own without their watchful eye. Know the unique roles each partner will play, and that goes back to letting staff know what's going to happen once we receive this grant. What is it going to look like for our organization? Procurement, right? Making sure that they know exactly how this grant needs to be expended. There's just so many elements to this that needs to be addressed to make sure that we get this funding and that we succeed. Now, relationship building for us program managers can be kind of hard because we're not always out there, what is it, shaking hands and kissing babies. Sometimes the executive leadership or board of directors, they're out there working closely with potential funders or building relationships out there in the community. But I do think that then it's important for us to make sure we're training them on the questions to ask, right? That's one element that I think you should add to your board training is just, hey, when it's time to write the grants, there's some things we need to know. And if it's possible, when you're out there talking to possible funders, when you're talking to local individuals then or charities or whoever the case is, make sure that you're asking the following questions. Attending, because it's always good to kind of find out what other funding sources that other individuals are using and how it could benefit you. Attend webinars, local chamber events, seek out direct contact info. These are for that nonprofit small business group. Of course, understanding the mission of the funder and recent project awarded means what? Doing some research, right? Going into their annual reports, to determine, kind of what did last year's giving report look like, right? Who did they fund? What projects did they fund? And do those things align with our work? Don't just seek the money, ensure that your goals and their goals align, because sometimes, although the grant funding opportunity seems like it's too good to be true for your group, it actually comes with some things that the tribe may not allow for, right? If there's certain financials or documents that they will want, and the tribe's not comfortable providing it, then it's not the right connection for you, source for you, right? Relationship building. So to develop those relationships, before you begin, make sure you have your documentation in place. The strategic housing plan that you have, a comprehensive master plan for your construction projects. If it's a business plan, make sure that's detailed. A strategic plan, make sure you have those things in place because it will become reference material later on, and it's a great source of being able to pull certain areas out. It's not a copy paste thing. You are going to use that information and then develop it for the purpose of the grant, but it's a great place to start. Of course, your financials, making sure that those are up to date and that they're positive. Obviously, if you're in an audit situation or there's findings or there's some, sort of issue like that, that's going to be much tougher for grantors to look at your financial situation and say, yes, this is the person that we want to move forward with awarding. However, I also think that it's a case by case thing, and sometimes, especially when it comes to federal funding, those things are of record, and maybe there's something surrounding it that they'll know more about than not. Letters of determination, that's your tax status. And then of course your unique entity identifier. For most grants, you're familiar. If you're not familiar yet, we'll talk about SAMS.gov. And it used to be the DUNS number that you needed to provide, and now it's the unique entity identifier. So the startup cheat sheet is right here on how to go about getting your unique entity identifier. If you're a THE, then you probably have the autonomy and authority to do that on your own. If you're a department, then maybe your economic development or your grants department is responsible for submitting on behalf of the tribe. So it just kind of depends on the process, right? DUNS is still out there, but it's, obviously that's used for a different reason. If you're a small business, then you probably have a DUNS number as well. But these are the two websites that you would most commonly reference, SAM.gov and then grants.gov. for searching. But your financial documents themselves, what are they going to ask for? I don't think if anyone's having connectivity issues, just let us know. Lewis is here in the background and he can check for us. But going back to what the grantors are going to be looking for, certainly the financial documents are key. So previous fiscal year's financial statements, current financial statements, program budget for sure. What do you plan to do with the funding? And what do you currently do with the funding you have? And then recent audit or CPA review. And then for our nonprofits that but cannot see the slides. Does everyone else see the slides? Pretty sure. Okay, great. It could be that you might want to check your settings to see if you have a layout that looks a little different. Majority of people say they can't see the slides. So again, if you're a nonprofit, then you need that IRS 990 as well. Highlighting capacity. So strategic plans, as I said before, funders want to know what capacity does your staff have. You're gonna need job descriptions, things like that. What demonstrated capacity does your organization have? That's why they look at your annual reports. Well, they'll even look at your social blueprint, right? What does your website look like? What does your if you have a Facebook page or an Instagram page or something like that, where individuals can go to seek out your services, right? So they'll look at these things. Annual reports, obviously, you publish them to public places like websites. So that is why that is the case. Internal controls, of course, policies and procedures, conflict of interest policies, diversity, equity, and inclusion statements, things of that nature. These are the kinds of things that they're going to look at to see a demonstrated level of capacity for your organization. So the first one we're going to talk about is the statement of purpose or mission statement. Is our mission statement clear? One of the things that we know is that, sometimes people start working on things and then they, get busy with the work of the housing authority and then nothing changes, right? So, or they don't go back to it, or it's been a really long time. So is it been too long, outdated, or unclear? These are the kinds of things that we want to be careful with. Marisol, right now I am on, let's see, letter of determination. It could be a connectivity issue. NLC, are you seeing me change the slides?
Let me see. Is your share screen still up?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the one I see is before you begin, gather your documentation.
Okay, so let's try that again. Screen.
Letter of determination is now up.
Okay, so I am currently on letter of determination. Let me move back here. Thank you so much for letting us know. So hopefully, if you want to just, Lewis, look at that, look at my slides for a sec, just to make sure they're changing.
Okay. Yeah, the one with that statement of purpose, mission statement?
Yeah, that's where I'm at now.
And highlight capacity.
Perfect. So I'll just backtrack real quick and say that we're talking about demonstrating capacity. So things like your strategic plans, your comprehensive master plans, construction plans that you have, those are the kind of things that they'll want to see. Annual reports, of course, that you all provide, your APR, if you have your IHPG funding, internal controls itself, they're going to want to see policies and procedures in place, conflict of interest, diversity, equity, and inclusion. I bring these up because oftentimes they may be outdated, which brings us to, our mission, our vision, our strategic plans. Are they too long, outdated, or unclear? As we saw with my slides, it can be confusing when things are not clear, right? When people are on different pages. So it's important to make sure that you dust out these things and make sure that they are the most recent, up to date, and make sense for your organization. So, of course, your letter of determination is in regards to your status, tax status, your financial statements. This gives you the definitions in regards to the IRS Form 990 and the sort of financial picture they're going to want to see. And again, your organization, the tribal community that you're working with, needs to be on board because if they want this information and it's not something that the tribe feels comfortable providing, you might already be in conflict and not able to move forward. So your plan itself will give a snapshot of the organization and its future. Stakeholders can utilize these plans and certainly not just funding, but also support, as I said. So these plans can include your executive summary, right? Just providing an overview of the program services, the products, the programs that you provide, any sort of analysis that you've done, not just on your community. So going back to the needs assessments that you've done, any sort of strategy or implementation for those programs that you have, new programs that you've put out, milestones, right? What have you done to show that you've accomplished the goals of not just the grant itself, but other objectives that you had. Evaluation and management summaries are also helpful for specific strategic projects that were funded specifically with the grant funds. And then, of course, your financial plan. Let me double check in the chat. I think that might have been the issue, going back and forth between that. When you refer to the statement of purpose and mission, are you talking about the overall company or the purpose of the project that you're trying to get the grant for? That's a great question. So it's twofold. You should have a statement of purpose or mission statement for your organization or for your business or nonprofit. That is something that really comes typically when you're working on a strategic plan or some. Yeah, of course, John. Yeah, the presentation will be is actually in the system, and I'll show you how to get to it after the presentation is ended. But going back to what I was saying, when it comes to the mission and vision, those statements are important to have so that your staff, your stakeholders, the board of directors, that everyone's on the same page with the goal that sometimes it needs to get approved from outside. Like, so for example, if I was a tribal housing department, I might have to get my statement, my mission, my vision developed with my staff, and then take that to council or to my EAO, my executive admin officer, or something like that. But as far as a TDHE is concerned, the executive leadership could decide to revamp their strategic plan, their mission, their vision, and then get that approved by their board. So that's first and foremost. I think that helps put everybody on the same page, and it's an important, it's a healthy thing for organizations to do. That's number one. It also helps because then you can determine what funding sources you want to seek out during that process as well. Say, some things worked for your organization, some things didn't. In terms of the second part of your question, the project itself should also have a mission, vision, purpose, right? So looking at the funding source, determining, well, what are these funds going to be used for? How are they going to accomplish the goal? How do they fulfill our mission and our vision? So it's kind of twofold. It's not as comprehensive as the first one I talked about, but I think it's important to outline it, even if it's just internally amongst the staff. Hope that answers your question. Awesome. Thank you, Louis. So again, another start today tool would be, okay, let's state the problem, the need that you have, right? So whether that's your clients or your customers, what need do they have? And then what relevant data do you have to support that? What's the solution, right? The product or service and how it's going to be solved. The business or service model, how will you make or bring money to the table to run the operation itself? The target market. Um, we all know that we're working with folks that are under a certain AMI, area median income. And so what does that look like? How will we let our clients know about the services that we'll provide? What's the advantage, right? What advantage do we have as the THE to provide certain services outside of other maybe local organizations? I work with groups out in South Dakota that, there are several housing um, options for folks to maybe try to get the immediate support that they need, and they're actually working with different housing services to maybe one is supporting emergency support, right, for light, water, electricity, and then someone else is providing rental assistance support, right? So how do we differentiate ourselves from the group? Um, the management team, what does that look like? What's the structure, the roles, the ideal employees, right? Maybe the funding that you receive will help to pay for the employees that are needed to support the services. Financial summaries. This is huge. This is the metrics of the budget, the profit and loss statements, the cash flow balances, the balance sheet themselves, and then funding required, right? So what financial amount is needed to be successful? In a perfect world, we just think the more money, the better. But I think we need to pay attention to, what does this look like? How does the funding roll out in terms of number of years? How long is my project, right? If it's a construction project, it might run 3-4 years. How do I allocate those funds so that they're the most efficient? And you're never going to be an expert at these things all at once. It takes working and collaborating with the other programs and departments within your tribe. And that's kind of why I think that it's important to kind of talk about relationship and build capacity there first, because you're not the first one to have done it within your organization. There are others. And so making sure you build capacity and learn from them is key. So the grant writing and marketing connection, leveraging the branding itself. What do I mean by that? Uh-oh, hopefully. Does everyone still see my screen, Lewis? The grant writing?
Yeah, you just changed to managing your reputation.
Okay, great. Because I'm not seeing the chat in the same way anymore, and it scared me for a second.
No problem. It's still
Alrighty,
going.
so awesome. So managing your reputation in person and online. So let's talk about what you're going to need to put. Thank you. I see your wave. Um, when you're looking at what, especially private funders, they're going to be looking at your website. They're going to be looking at your customer service, your follow-up, your contact us with the information where people, if it's services specific that you're providing, then how do people connect with you, right? What does that look like? Think about it from your own perspective. When you're working with an organization, what's the first thing you might do to see if it's a good fit? You'll go to their website, you'll go to their social media. And I think that, or if you personally wanted to purchase something, that's what you would do. And so we've kind of got this strange place that we're all in now, where this is just a natural reaction to say, let's go check this group out, right? And this is how we do it. And that could mean a lot of things. If it's a nonprofit, or if it's a small business, then of course we're looking at the Google reviews. We're looking at social media, whether they have a Facebook page, and most information based, it doesn't have to have the comments turned on, meaning this isn't meant to have actual social interaction, but more so to provide information as to what you provide, and the services that are out there. So managing that is sometimes uncomfortable. How many of your organizations have these tools? Most of you probably have websites, but if you do have a website, it hasn't been updated like recently. What I find is that a lot of times we spend the money on, and I do know that it can be costly to spend the money on a website, and then it goes stagnant for a very long period of time. And so we just maybe don't know how to pick that back up, or there's no staff in the office that have the skill set to update update it and manage it. But it is important. I do think that, especially when we get to the point where that's going to be where people find our annual reports. Let me look through our chat. Any of you using social media or updating your websites with the services you provide, and then putting that information out there? Um, you know, it's really, really important that I think we at least have some sort of presence. And the reason why is because, again, funders will look to see where your services are access points, who's able to access your services, and how you interact with them. If it's they have to come in the office, then it can be a little bit tough for a organization like, um, let's say it's Walmart, who's, one of a private funder who's wanting to provide some sort of support. They don't see a connection for them because there's no way to promote that on their end, and that's kind of where I'm leading with that. So, start today tools. If there's a local funder that you think might be a good fit, then follow them on social media. See what they've got going on, and it's that reciprocal. You'll follow them, you'll see what they've got going on, you'll like their services, the things that they're doing in their community, to support the work. And then, you commit to posting as often as you can, especially if you're a small nonprofit or starting a business, something along those lines. So Lindell says we have an active website, official Facebook, both promoted daily and as needed. And so it's almost as if it shows a level of health, um, to have those things updated. Is it accurate? Is that an accurate measurement of your organization and its productivity? No, not at all. I'm sure there are many people who don't promote on these platforms, and it's fine. However, I think that unfortunately, it is saying something, and funders do look at these elements to see if it can benefit them. Because going back to the fact that this grant writing itself, the grant making is a relationship. They want to be able to have an exchange, a mutual exchange happen, and part of that means promoting themselves as well. So, something to think about is, making sure your content on those pages have value, that it's not all about, if it's a business, that it's not all about selling. If it's a service, that it's not all about the service itself, but maybe, highlight some of the things that you've done, accomplishments, first time home buyers, right? A class that just took place. Interesting, something that's specific to family and community, and that it's relevant, right? That these aren't posts from 2013. And I kid you not, they're out there. There are websites that just, when you see these things, it does give you a sense of, well, how can I make this better? And again, I know that some of the skill sets, I'm not a web developer myself, but I do think that, with the help of Canva and other social tools, that you can easily rectify some of this stuff if you put any attention towards it. Which, that's the thing. Sometimes you're so busy doing the actual work of the organization, these things go to the wayside. And that it's easy to digest, simple words, nothing too complex. So again, my startup today or start today tool would be check your website out and see what's on there, right? If you have some social media, see what was the last thing you posted, and see if there's something that you can't highlight, a positive, an impact, a measure, something that you measured and you were like, wow, this is amazing. If it's in your annual report, or it's in your funding report, then go ahead and put that out there for people to hear about it. Going back to data collection and statistics, your community needs assessments, client satisfaction. I'm sure many of you provide surveys for the services you provide. Put that information out there, right? You're getting positive feedback somewhere. Otherwise, you still wouldn't be doing what you're doing. So put it out there for everybody to hear. Census Bureau statistics, sure, that's available. State and federal statistical data is available. Sometimes even in the aggregate, Google provides all kinds of data as to what's going on in your local area. But yeah, put this information out there for people to hear it. Sometimes it's not specific to your organization, but it's helpful for funders to see that you're paying attention to these things. That makes sense. So cross-training and staff capacity. This is a big one because a lot of times there's a grants person in the room, right? There's a grants person in the department, and that's the person we rely on. For us over at the Native Learning Center was Vince, and poor Vince left us. So now what, right? The argument is, what do we do when they leave? It's important that we're cross-training staff to handle to navigate research on grants that might be available, to pay attention to keywords, things that are going on in our industry that we need to look at, right? So Vince was on it when the OMB Super Circular came out, and he was on it when we had to change over to the unique identifier and all these things. So do you have the capacity to complete objectives without this person? And then if the answer is no, then you need to do some cross training to build staff capacity. And I know of all the things that you all have going on, that can be tough to do. And Google information can be corrected. So that's also helpful, because if they're out there putting out wrong information, then you want to make sure that it's updated. Sometimes they've got, especially in tribal communities with addresses and things like that, and just or I've gone to certain websites and the staff that it's like 3 EDs out from the last person who's been responsible for that organization. So things like that you just want to update. So we talked about staff. Let's talk about the different types of matching. So some grants, this kind of goes into the types of grants. So some grants are matching or leveraging of resources, right? So it could be time, right, from a staff member. Maybe you're working on a project, and so they match the amount of time. Another funding source, as I said earlier, if you have Indian Housing Block Grant funds, you can leverage those resources with ICDBG funds. Typically for housing project construction projects, they're so costly that you do need to find matching funds and in order to complete projects over time. You might have some low-income housing tax credits and other funding sources that you're using. And again, you're trying to leverage those resources. Say, this is what I have, and with your funding, this is what I can accomplish. In kind could be food service. So for example, food services, accounting, supplies, clientele, maybe organization to organization, you can match. I am on matching in kind may be required. Uh-oh, we might have the same issue again. I'm going to share my screen again. Matching in kind may be required. So this is just that list of ways in which the funds you have may help support the work that you do with the funds you get. Everybody still with me? All right. So let's talk a little bit about capacity and building capacity with essential skills. So here I have with me the Boise Valley Economic Partnership. And so I did a training with Shoni Bannock, executive director, former executive director, Shalyn Kellogg. And essentially she was saying that, sometimes we're not necessarily, look, there's the thought that now housing is just as much as important to economic development than the businesses themselves. And so it's like, well, let's find out more information on what that would look like, right? So in the case of this particular city, Meta, which is the new name of Facebook and Instagram all in one. They announced that they're going to be building this $1 million data center, right? So it's like, well, what does this mean for the city? What does this mean for the native business owners that might be near or around this area? And how can it support the work that we do, right? So she wanted more information, and this is kind of the road she went down to get there, right? So she looked at this Boise Valley Economic Partnership. She started there. She found this information out on their website, and I made sure to capture this bottom half because you can see here that there's tons of information to be found. Because of course, the whole point of an economic partnership is to try to bring business, attract business opportunities, and so there's tons of information that you can utilize for your grant. So Antonio says, I know a lot of times with my organization, we can be awarded up to 80% of sharing costs from the federal grant, but 20 is our responsibility, right? From as a local government that comes from in-kind contributions and sometimes a percentage from the state sharing the cost. Exactly. So that's a great example of the matching or the sharing that needs to take place with that 20% itself. So you're offsetting that 20% with some in-kind contribution, which is great. Especially if you're not in a place where that 20% would hit your budget harder, right? If you had to do it alone. So that's an awesome example. Thank you for sharing it. Let me make sure I didn't miss anybody else's comments. That was awesome. So now that we know that the city of Kuna is bringing this particular company, she did some additional research. And she went, and this is the thing about looking for and doing the research is that you're going to have to do some digging. Typically, it's at the bottom of most of these websites. And then you can see what target industries they're looking into. So from an economic lens, she went to, then she thought, well, what if I went down the list to all the economic development partners throughout the state of Idaho in order to determine what might be a good fit for our organization. And so that's the kind of additional research she did. And I brought this kind of just the images to show you that this is the kind of research that you'll have to do, especially when it's coming from state and local partners, when it's coming from private funders. It's not going to be readily available to you like it shows on grants.gov, right? I wanted to talk about Indian Collective because they also have a grant making area where it says grants and fellowship. And just recently they had individual grants. So they came to visit with our organization, South Dakota Native Homeownership Coalition, and they talked about the Collective Abundance Fund. It was a tri-state area, eligibility area of Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota, and they awarded individual grants from $25,000 or $50,000 to support different elements. It could be housing, education. It was rebuilding indigenous wealth. The idea that if that's what was something that we didn't have an opportunity to build over time in the last 100 years, this is how we can support the opportunities that are out there that are young, not just young, but that our families and individuals need, right? So it could have been housing. Maybe someone wants to purchase a home that could have gone towards down payment. It could go towards paying off student debt. It could be used to just build some space for those individuals to build their capacity individually. And, this was tough because it's like, okay, well, for sure, I'm not a grant writer. I'm an individual and I've never written a grant. What do you do then? So they did what's called navigators. And so if you had written a grant before and you assisted someone, then you also received, I think it was like $500 to help these individuals write these grants. The neat thing about this is that they also have organizational grants. They have, small business grants, etc. So definitely check out their website. But I wanted to bring it to your attention because they mentioned that they had provided several webinars on the topic, and that they noticed that the webinar that majority of people watched the first webinar, just that gave general information about the grant, but that slowly the views on their webinars dropped. Like the numbers were just, compared to how many applicants they received, they didn't have as many views, and that was concerning to them. Think about it. They had a PDF, like how to, they had webinars on YouTube. They did as much as they possibly could to get people prepared to submit the grant. And so that's what I want to highlight here, is that a lot of times, you've got to go to the funder and make sure you're paying attention to all the resources they put out. When they created this collective abundance fund, they did community panels where they went across the country to different places and said, what does Indigenous wealth look like? And these panels provided them with a wealth of knowledge. Those reports were on the website. So when you're writing the grant, what you would do is go to those reports, see what language they use, see what the intention was. Going back to the previous question, knowing what their mission and vision look like would make it easier for you to write the grant for yourself. So additional resources, for sure. There's tons of small business information here that I wanted to just put out there. But start today. What would you do? Research your local economic and community development organizations. In the case of tribal communities, lots of CDFIs have that information on their website as well. So it's worth taking a look if you haven't been there in a while to do that. So other places to find grants, of course, this is just a running list of options. But I also wanted to provide you with live links. So these are located here as well. The ones that are in white are not links. I wanted to provide you with some non-native options as well, because there's a lot of money out there that isn't necessarily just specific for Native communities, but also could support your services. Also pay attention to things. Things change, right? Street Shares Foundation is now Second Service Foundation. This is a really important one. First Nations, they're a huge grant maker for both small business and for tribal organizations. So very important. Thank you for bringing them up. And if I don't have, I have them there. But a huge organization that does amazing work. Certainly, some of these resources are paid, and I wanted to remind everyone that your local library system, your tribal library system might be able to have them for free. So I don't want you paying for things that you can get for free. So when I say Google it, I'm not being lazy. I'm just saying be careful that you can Google it, but then your local library has a lot of this stuff, because once you go down the road of clicking certain things, they may try to charge you for grant information that is readily available or free at the library. So some grant writing basics. Now we're going to talk about the mechanics themselves. Of course, many of you are familiar with grants. So a notice of funding opportunity or notice of funding availability, that's just a fancy way of saying that this is an opportunity for you to apply for a grant, and that a review team or a team of reviewers is going to review this particular grant, that there's some sort of scoring involved, and that information is going to be on there as well. They're going to ask for a narrative report, a financial budget, and feasibility. Staff capacity. This goes back to your job descriptions. When was the last time you updated them, right? So what you can update and have ready ahead of time is so important for a grant writer, because oftentimes you're collecting this information piecemeal. And so the last thing you want to do is realize that you don't have your staff organizational chart updated, and then you got to go and do that. So it's like start and stop. Technical writing requirements, right? It could be that you need to have it 12-point font. Someone put some of the technical writing requirements you've seen in the chat for me, since I've got so many that have done some grant writing in the past. And then that'll give us an example of what that looks like. But yeah, and then going back to what was said earlier with that organizational match or in-kind element, it's usually the case that organizations want to see that you bring something to the table. I know 12 point font, 12 point size font, doubles 1.5 space is just one of those things that people that get put in these NOFAs that they don't want to see. They want to see a specific font. Uh, what else? No more than so many pages. They'll tell you how many pages it can be as well. So the four important questions to ask before writing the grant is: one, is your organization eligible? Sometimes you're collecting information and doing what needs to be done, and then you find out that you're not even eligible to apply for the grant. Is your staff qualified? Right? There are certain capacity that they need to demonstrate, certain years of experience, maybe certain sorts of projects that they've accomplished in the past that would demonstrate that. Do you have the capacity to adequately manage the grant, right? If it's funded or awarded, oh, that's a good question. So what if you're writing the grant so you can get the capacity, right? So what would you do in that case? I think that the person who's writing the grant, the executive director, whomever will have direct interaction with those employees, that's the person who has to demonstrate that they can manage it and manage it well. So certainly it's possible for you to get a grant so you can hire staff. ANA, right? You're going to get a grant so that you can hire staff, build capacity with your organization to grow and serve your community. That's totally fine. Is the person in charge or the stakeholders that are overseeing the grant, do they have capacity? And that could just mean managing other grants. If you don't have any findings, never had any sort of issues with that. If you can demonstrate that, then yeah, no, that's perfect. Deborah says she's a new small nonprofit, native led. And so, yeah, these are the kind of growing pains that you'll have at first. But as long as yourself, your team, even if it's small, it's mighty. And I'm sure your board or, the organizations that you work with, this goes back to your statements of support. If you're working to do good work in your community with other organizations, then someone can demonstrate your capacity by showing a letter of support as well. And then what type of grant is it? So the types of grants we talked, I just kind of mentioned it, but just in case, some grants are competitive, right? It's you against your neighbor, right? An evaluation of I think I have a reviewer in the room who might be able to chime in as well. But certainly there's competitive awards. So your application needs to be top notch. Recipients are not predetermined. The other element to this could be that you've got formula funding. That's your Indian Housing Block Grant funds, for example, right? They take a certain population criteria, and then you have to meet minimum requirements. There's continuation funding. Continuation funding is a fancy way of saying you already have this particular funding, and so you're kind of already seen as you've already demonstrated the capacity. You're a grant recipient already, and so you can apply again versus new applicants. I liken this to when you go to a doctor's office and they say they're no longer seeing new patients. This is something similar to that. It's like, okay, we're not actually accepting new applicants at this time for this particular award year. We're going to go ahead and just evaluate continue those that are continuing with funding. Let's see. I think there was a question. Is the block grant a part of continuation funding? No, I feel like this is different. Because it says current grantees are awarded extra points during the review process for current grant recipient. So in the case of block grant funding, they do pay attention to your past history, and whether or not you have any findings and things of that nature. But I wouldn't consider this part of the continuation funding because it's not guaranteed, unless you can. There's a period where you can review it and determine whether or not that the funding itself uh, is correct. Where am I? Continuation funding. The next step is pass-through funding. So pass-through funding is grants or funds typically given by the federal government to states and tribes for further distribution. So this goes back to the Antonio's statement regarding the state or the local government providing additional funding and then or receiving the grant and then it being passed through to other organizations. Typically that's government to government, and not individuals or anything like that. In regards to staff qualification, I ran into not having an admin rights on grants.gov initially to be able to apply for grants. The apply button was grayed out until I had gotten 4 types of roles to be I'm sorry. The apply button was grayed out until I got one of 4 types of roles to be able to apply. Wow. So now you can kind of see why it's really important. In that beginning, we talked about the people under pressure and the processes under pressure. A lot of times, people don't necessarily have the right access to do these things, and or they are no longer with the organization, and now you're having to start over and figure out how to access them yourself. So I'm glad that you were able to finally get admin rights back, but I'm sure it was a lengthy process. Knowing your audience. So in regards to the narrative of the grant itself, concentrate your energy on the main purpose of the grant itself, right? What does the funder say that the formula or the continuation funding is for? Make sure that the people in your organization know exactly what reports to submit, what documents may need to be updated, and then also to any requested material, right? So I know at one point we were trying to submit our APR and we had such a tough time because we didn't have the correct form, and so we had to go back to our grants management manager to kind of evaluate whether or not we were doing it correctly. And it went back and forth for a while, but eventually we got it right. But reading the funding announcement is important because, this will give you the guidance. We were actually using the wrong form, an older form, and that is the reason why it wasn't submitting. So the common elements of a proposal is your cover sheet, right? Your table of contents, your abstract or a need statement, executive summary, as I said before, a project design or whatever methodology you're going to use. Sometimes it's an org chart. They'll request those job descriptions, and it may even say that you, if you're doing some sort of time sharing, then allocate that time period. Like, what does that look like for that staff if they're already sharing their time with other grants? Evaluation, the budget narrative. And we'll talk a lot more about budget narrative here in a minute. But the attachments, right? Resumes, letter of supports, etc. So with the abstract, you want to make sure it's clear, concise, and that the overview of the need is there. You want to make sure that you don't use the first person voice, that it's the organization itself speaking. Standalone description of the project or need, that you cover all the elements, anticipated outcomes, who and how they'll be impacted by your business or your services, key activities, and the staff involved. And the abstract it needs to be succinct. It can't be too wordy. It's got to just have exactly what they're looking for, because this is what's used to send it to the right reviewer. So for my reviewer in the room, you can talk about how important that abstract really is, because oftentimes if they're too lengthy or wordy, think about it from their perspective. The day in the life of a reviewer is to look at hundreds of applications. And so, of course, now with technology, they probably have some sort of algorithm through their portal also helping them, get applicants that can rise to the top. But, the need statement itself, the clearer the statements, the clearer the abstract, the better off you'll be. So here's just some tips that I have, and they're in list form, so you'll be able to reference it later. Documentation and the data itself. You can use, of course, you want to cite all your resources, statistics, documentation, etc. Case studies are also helpful. Referencing these things, the objective statistics surveys. I kind of talked about this earlier in terms of the data and the things that you can use to support the need, right? So in regards to evaluation, who's responsible for evaluation of the program or of the service? Who's responsible for the reporting? What do those measurement tools look like? How often will they report what on progress or success to be measured? And then when will the reports be prepared, right? So for example, the input itself is new sales equipment. That's what you're going to get when you get these funds. Output, number of customers served or clients served. Outcomes, increased sales and employee efficiency. Certainly that comes from getting new sales equipment. And impact, order accuracy, client satisfaction, right? So in this particular case, the small business, they are getting new sales equipment. But from that, you've got not just input, which is they bought this thing with the funding, but here's the output, here's the outcomes, and here's the impact. So it takes it several steps further. So with budget development, it's something similar. Common budget categories include your personnel, the benefits for that personnel, equipment, supply, contractual needs that might, and then also travel that you might have within your organization. So of course you can dream big and start brainstorming that initial budget, but eventually you got to narrow it down to the grantor's range and the allowable expenses. That's key. What's allowable? Don't include non-allowable expenses. You might have some, but that's going to be considered non-program income, things that don't come from that particular funding source. Again, now we're getting to a point where it's just things I've outlined for you. So they're in checklist form, and then that way you'll have them. So for example, all expenses must be reasonable, project specific, include partner contributions, both in kind and cash, use budget formats that are recommended by the funder. I know there might be other programs that funders have, but specific to the funder, make sure that you're using the right one. Ensure that anything you ask for in the budget is at least mentioned in your proposal. So that's another one. A lot of times people forget that they don't have a line item for it, and never include a miscellaneous category because typically it leads to questions. It's not clear as to what the funding was used for. So here's more information on the budget narrative. And then spell check has evolved, right? So when it comes to the narrative, your writing narrative itself, let's not try to reinvent the wheel here. Grammarly, there's this other AI called Hemingway. There are a few that will help with spelling, grammar, punctuation, clarity, engagement, and delivery mistakes, right? I'm not telling, obviously with AI, you have to be careful, but there is some help out there when you're just stuck, right? There's more than one way to say something. I tend to be wordy. So for me, I like plugging it in, kind of seeing what other options make more sense and how I can use less words. And this helps. Now, I don't copy and paste it directly into my grant writing, but, I do think that it's been helpful for me to just kind of, separate from the grant itself. I go and I check to see if this makes sense. And then I bring it back in and cut and paste that. Remember, when your proposal is complete, be sure to do the following. And again, checklist style. Of course, spell check and review grammar. Compare the sections to the funder's criteria. Going back to Indian Collective and that, and what I was telling you about, they paid attention to their views, and they said, "Wow, people really didn't use all the information we gave them to perfect their grant," which was telling to them. And of course, that means that they're going to do some more outreach on their end to make sure more people are aware that the resources are available. But compare, evaluate things like, again, each section flows and that it's logical. Recheck the math in the budgets, the format itself, the font size, the margins, the page count, all the things we talked about. So grant submission itself, of course, it may not end with you. You might also need to make sure that the executive, the BOD, council, that's, whoever needs to have this information has it in a timely manner so that they, that you can get on their schedule. You'll hear a lot of times people are griping because, council meets on this day and, they may or may not get to the grant. And it's like, so the earlier, the better that you start, so you can get the process situated, and you're able to submit. Patience is a virtue. The NOFA, the RFP is a request for proposal. The NOFA, the notice of funding availability, or website should indicate when to expect notification, right? So if you're waiting on an acceptance, then you should know exactly when that will take place. Don't contact the funder about the status. Prompt acknowledge notification even if the answer is no. So that part we're going to talk about next. I've got some other checklists in here. We said earlier, you've got community support. You might need council approval. Maybe finance department has to take a look at this grant and make sure that they can work with it. Grants management, if you have that element in your organization, great. Grant reporting within your organization, and then those outcome, making sure that they're all measurable and deliverable. That's the staff element. Where I want to head next, because I don't have a whole lot of time left, is managing the grant, right? So developing the narrative, making sure that you continue with the objectives that you've set out once you receive the funding, and that you have your annual report writing in place, and that you manage the hard-fought relationships, right? So confessions of a grantor, when they look at the post-award phase, preparing, processing, issuing, and tracking grants assistance, and compliance with the reporting requirements, that comes up as number one. So it's important to kind of see from their angle that they want to make sure that you're compliant, right, with the funding itself, but that you're also checking in with them to make sure that your objectives are being met. So for example, if I have a small nonprofit, you might be purchasing equipment, you might be providing training, maybe there's some operational costs involved. These things need to be identified as as objectives that you all are achieving in your annual report. Expanding capacity to serve, right? The duty to serve that you have, this is how you're going to go ahead and demonstrate that. These are the phrases that you would use. Meeting a community need, improving educational impact, targeting initiatives and collaborative programs and partnerships. Going back to keywords and key phrases, this all starts with the things that the reviewer is looking at. I like to think of it as a tour guide, right? When you're the tour guide, and this is you developing that annual report. Looks like we've got the same slide issue. I apologize, guys. I don't know what's going on with this. As I said, technology pressure. I will stop share one last time. Let's start sharing again. There we go. So right now I'm talking about your annual report and your reporting style. And I'm basically saying that, think of it as a tour guide. When you go to a museum, it's been curated. There is a way in which they want you to tour the museum, right? And that's how you should see your annual report, or your whatever report you're providing to your funder. Selecting what is most important: the story, the flow of the organization, and then the feeling that it gives them, right? It has to be easy to read, easy to understand, easy to fund, is how they kind of see it. So when is the application deadline? What are the eligibility requirements? What is the selection criteria? How long will it take, right? So how long should it be? The plan itself. It can't be 50 pages. That would be too long for any one funder to read. Are funds received taxable? Need statement. We talked about that. Creative writing techniques are alternative tools in your toolbox. So we are in the trenches. We are the ones researching the data. We are too close to it. That's usually what happens, is that our perspective is way off sometimes, and we need to take a step back. I like to give it to someone outside of our organization sometimes, just so that we can see if maybe we're too close to the problem, and see how we can't rewrite this so that it makes more sense for the reviewer or the grants manager. So for example, let's talk about tone. So for example, perspective of the organization, typically not in the first person, as I said, it reflects the writer's attitude towards the subject, right? You want to make sure your tone isn't cynical, comedic. And I know that's kind of hard to do sometimes. If that's your natural personality. Sympathetic, cheerful, outraged, positive. These are example of tone. What tone do you want to strike in the case of grant writing? So here we have an example of that. It says, have you ever felt alone in a crowded room? Addressing addiction, grief, or family issues can be isolating. Simply Hope Family Outreach provides relief to families in need. A safe and confidential space in Burley, Idaho, Simply Hope Family provides little to no cost counseling to those in need. So in this particular example, they demonstrate their services, how they provide it. They gave you a sense of what being alone feels like and how they're able to address those feelings in a safe space and environment that's no cost to the families that they serve. I mean, I got so much out of it, and it had tone. I think that's the idea there. When I mention tone, I think that how you write really does have more to do with how it makes a person feel. But in the confines of course, the funder's requests, right? They have their boundaries, their perimeters that you have to meet. Sentence structure, right? Cadence of short and long sentences is kind of the best practice there. And it engages the reader and it helps them move on when there's a combination. I think in HUD speak, we're used to, using a lot of acronyms, using a lot of language that sometimes doesn't always evoke images. And so we can get better at it, I think. So for example, the use of visually descriptive or figurative language, not flowery. I didn't say too much, right? This goes back to editing. But I do think that imagery helps. So for example, this is a sample from this particular person's grant. Jacqueline Hastine is filling the air with the sweet smell of salted caramel. Hastine is the owner of I Need Sugar, a bakery and tea shop located in Gallup, New Mexico. The pages of the family cookbook are worn and discolored, the binding held together by tape, but the recipes inside hold years of memories for Jacqueline Hastine and the traditional foundation for her small business. So this just gives you an idea of what I mean when I say pull out the things that have happened that you help to support in your community, and do some storytelling. So a fact wrapped in story is 22 times more likely to be memorable than a mere pronouncement of the fact itself, right? So knowing that, we can use that to our benefit. I also wanted to bring forth this, it's called the story timeline. And it's basically, what you can do to build tension, especially in your narrative. Like, let's say you had a first time home buyer, right? You can use this to kind of break down the dynamic. When the family got to you and your services, they didn't have a place to stay, and it wasn't stable, inciting the incident, in which case they had to come to your organization for support services. Rising action, by working with your program manager, you were able to provide those additional resources necessary for the family to move into a brand new home. Climax, right? Following action resolution, that particular family is now the kids are now attending school full time. They're attending homebuyer classes, and the resolution is that the impact is that you were able to stabilize this family to the point where they were able to see home ownership as an opportunity for them. So this is just one small example of the way in which you use this particular tool. But sometimes we just get jaded, and we're so, as I said, close to our work that we don't necessarily always use these tools to tell a story. So the beginning, the middle, and the end is important as far as hooking the reader, informing and persuading them, emphasizing the urgency, right? The action that is needed, but that you close on the positive work that you're doing in your community. So I provided this exercise as well. So this particular Shipping Container Inc. provides affordable and unique housing to 10 families each year. The $20,000 investment will support research, design, and construction of 10 container homes, right? So if this is the funder, here's maybe the beginning. Give home a brand new meeting. The TDHE, and I say M, because it's no one in particular, presents Shipping Container Inc. with the opportunity to provide affordable and unique housing to 10 families in need. The $20,000 investment will support research, design, and construction of 10 container homes and community center education pods. So the middle might sound like affordability is defined by 30% of the total income towards rent, mortgage payment, utilities, taxes, insurance. The tribe has contributed the land lease, and the area median income in our community meets the eligibility. We think that TDHE or TDHE itself, represents, or TDHE recipients may make 60 to 80% below the area median income and need strategic alternatives to combat the lack of affordable housing stock. Our buildings will cost so much to make, whatever that amount is, to manufacture and deliver. In the end, we invite Shipping Container Inc. to help meet our critical need in our community. Together, we can provide safe and affordable living conditions and unique community education space. So this is an example of someone else's response. And what we would do is work through it to determine how we create a better beginning, middle, and end. What we could maybe do to apply some of those things we talked about before in terms of story, maybe, talk about how a container like that would benefit one of the families. Of course, tone, not speaking in the first person. There are some things that we would need to fix. So in a longer session, maybe that's what I would do with the client, to be able to talk a little bit about how to make that stronger. Managing the grant and stress level. Multitasking is not always our friend. Your ability to concentrate single-mindedly on the most important use of your time, it's crazy to think, but at the end of a busy day, you can lose as many as 10 IQ points from multitasking. So what I would say is that it's important to manage your time well when you're writing a grant. You're not going to be able to get in and out of it as quickly as you think. So review the agenda ahead of time. When it comes to having to collect information from other people, right? Go to them, set up a meeting, and that agenda needs to be succinct. This is the documentation or the information or the details or the data that I need in order to be successful. The time of day that you write is important as well. There's studies that show that, there's just Some people, it's better for them to work first thing in the morning. Maybe they won't have the information until that afternoon, requiring them to write at night, and then they have writer's block. So think about that, manage that. Your workspace itself. I know that there's sometimes I can't function if I might have to put everything off my desk so I could focus on the grant itself. Of course, there's stress that comes along with writing a grant, right? And here are all those symptoms that we probably all know of, as far as memory problems, moodiness, aches and pains, eating more or less. So I just wanted to put that out there because it's so stressful. Writing a grant can be stressful that I think that we need to. Tasha says she's burning up her brain by multitasking. I'm just saying it might be helpful if we all took a step back and reminded each other that, in order to have a quality of life, even in the process of writing a grant, that we are cognizant of the fact that we need to make some balance. I know some grant writers that are just stressed out. Like they almost run looking stressed out all the time. And we have to be mindful of the fact that it can make you stressful. So it slide says for profit. You said nonprofit. Are they the same? Gwen, in which slide? I just want to make sure. Sorry, I missed that. Same requirements for as far as the skills themselves. If it was talking about the skills of tone and of the story arc, then yeah, they're the same. I know that some for-profits, definitely for-profits want you to be, they want it to be capturing because also they have their board of directors to answer to, and they want that story to be compelling. But yeah, you're welcome to put that answer in the chat and I can look it up. Let's see here. So next, just a reminder of some of the things that we talked about earlier. I kind of broke them all down so that you would have them here at the end. So the last thing I want to say is that if you've been approved, I want you to do this. Thank the grantor, thank the partners. How often do you do that? I mean, even if it's the federal grantors, how often? Is it on the website? Is somewhere they can see it? Are you acknowledging them? Thanking your partners, handwritten notes, thanking the grantor. It sounds silly, but these things matter. Inform the stakeholders. Add grantors to your mailing list, right? I would be sending them, hey, I've got a home ownership workshop coming up. I know they'll never come, but they're going to get it anyway, because that's what great work is being done in the community. Invite them to a site visit to take photos. Keep track of reporting. That's essential. And apply for another grant and reapply. Right? Nominate grantors. Oh, this is another good one. Nominate your grantors for awards. If they're giving monies out and you've been awarded, in what way could they maybe be highlighted somewhere? So if you've been denied, connect with the program officer, not immediately, obviously, but at some point, if you can connect with the program officer, find out who got funded. That's an easy one because typically the awards are announced. Send a thank you anyway. Keep in touch, right? See acceptance maintenance. We'll talk about that. Reassess, reread, and reapply, right? So there's nothing wrong with trying again. To achieve long-term success with grant writing, don't promise what you can't deliver, right? I think that there's a lot of money out there, but you may not need it all to do the work that you want to do. So just be careful with that. Don't undervalue what you bring to the table in terms of, again, even if you're a small organization, the work that you're doing and those stories are important, and people would want to hear them if you could just bring that to them through the writing. Deepen your partnerships. Don't bring more grantors on than you can cultivate, because sometimes your and I've seen this happen where you've got several funders now and they're all kind of needing, a piece of your time and attention, and it just becomes overwhelming for yourself or your staff. Accept invitations to attend grantor events. It's nice when you can attend their events and vice versa. But never compromise your mission. Sometimes you might take on something and then realize, that it's just not a good fit, and you don't pursue it the following year. And there's nothing wrong with that. Let's see here. So other sources of knowledge where you can gather other details, new grant proposals that are out there, annual reports. Maybe somebody's asking for something in a grant proposal and you think, that's interesting. I might be able to use that, for the future. Newsletters, ads, fact sheets, press kits, things like that. And of course, because many of you are managing federal grants, then of course the budget controls, and these are good policies and procedures to have regardless of whether it's public or private. But, of course, regulatory compliance matters. Your best practices on record keeping, budget controls, record retention, procurement, personnel, etc. So have a plan. And then I also provided resources, just a little glossary of some of the, things that I didn't know at first that I had to kind of Google on my own. And so it was nice to have it all in one place. Thank you. I appreciate you all being here. My apologies for running over a little bit. I just wanted to make sure I could answer your questions in real time. I'm going to stop share now. I'm going to reference just one other thing. So as far as the page itself, where you are right now, you'll see that on the left, there's a files tab. Louis, if you're trying to get to the end, I'll get you there.
Thank you.
No worries. Let me walk through these last couple ones. So of course I mentioned the glossary. Intake, right? So important numbers, dates, things like that. So try to make yourself a little cheat sheet like this. That'll be helpful to you as well. So typically awarded grants from HUD are found, they do an announcement, like that last round of ICDBG recipients, there was an announcement. I received it in an email, so I'm sure there's a listserv you can sign up for. I'll try looking for it, and maybe I can send that out for you in an email. But that's how I received it. And so going back to this little slide here, it's just grant intake essentials. So that's what I have in a cheat sheet for myself. For your organization, it might look different. Grants to-do list is another one. So I just put the month, the activity, and then completed, because I know each grant and their due date might be different. And then what else? Down here on the left, you'll see files. This is where you're going to see a copy of today's presentation, the list of links that are in the presentation, and then of course the glossary. And then of course the web links themselves are all live here in that middle section. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and give this back to our friends at the Native Learning Center. Thank you very much for having me today. I really do appreciate being here. And that's it.
Well, thank you so much, Maria. Really do appreciate it. And everyone, thank you for stopping for such great information. It's really, this is just great information. We love giving out the NLC. It's one of our things that we really enjoy. And before everyone runs off real quick, let me launch our survey for you real quick. This is our survey that we're launching for everyone. It should be set. If you follow the link that's listed, that will give us our feedback. Just do us a huge favor. Take a second out and fill out our survey. This is really huge for us. It tells us what we need to do better or what we're doing great already. And we really just want to keep improving the best way we can and just to keep bringing you these great webinars. Our next webinar is August 31st. It's going to be Tribal Grants Management Part 1, presented by Vince Franco, owner of Next Venture Consulting, LLC. Vince, of course, worked with us at the NLC for a very long time. So you know this is going to be a really great webinar. You can access any of the recorded webinars by going to the Cathedra online, and you can check out our website directly at nativelearningcenter.com. Also, check out all of our upcoming events. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. You can also listen to the Hobothnica Native American podcast at any podcast location, such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Google Podcasts, or at our own Simplecast. As always, thank you so much for stopping by. You could have been anywhere else, but we're so thankful you came here. Thank you so much, and you have a wonderful day.